Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 5 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2014. So this is the final part of this video, which means that we have reached my personal favorite Asian horror films from this particular year. So of the 8 films we will be covering tonight, Japan produced 7 of them. However, in terms of style, story, and scares, there's a lot of variety and creativity on display this evening, as we'll see. And as always, titles for all of the movies I discussed will be listed in the description box below. Now, the first film tonight is definitely on the weird and grimy side, and that is Hana-Dama, The Origins, 2014. This is a Japanese horror drama. Now, the plot synopsis from the back of the Blu-ray does have a spoiler of sorts, so I'm going to keep it vague for our purposes here. From the wild imagination of director Hisayasu Sato comes a twisted tale of revenge in this terrifying film. Bullied high school student Mizuki has the ultimate revenge on her tormentors in this horror fest tinged with dark humor. Mizuki endures the humiliation and abuse of her friends and herself until she is pushed too far, and eventually chooses to exact revenge, with bloody consequences, against the bullying classmates and teachers. So the Letterboxd website has a pretty interesting plot description that's different. Listen to this. Quote, Hana-Dama, a flower in the wasteland. This flower is a symbol of earthly desires, and every human is overwhelmed by desire, and their rationality collapses wherever the flower is in bloom. And even today, the Hana-Dama continues to blossom profusely somewhere in the world. Unquote. So just keep that little description in mind while watching this and while I'm giving you my review here. So right from the opening scene, you know that you're in for something different, okay? This shows our protagonist naked in an alleyway with her brain split open and throbbing like a pulsing flesh wound. Yeah, that's how this film begins. But things settle down, kind of, a little bit after that. So if you're not familiar with the director, Hisayasu Sato, watch the prior videos in this YouTube playlist because I reviewed some of his career highlights. I reviewed Pleasure Kill, Lolita Vibrator Torture, Turtle Vision, Naked Blood, Night of Bodies Model, and the short film Caterpillar from the anthology Rampo Noir. So this is a director who incorporates uncomfortable, sleazy elements into his films, and some of those elements do make their way into Hana-Dama. But I want to emphasize that Sato is not a boring, lowbrow filmmaker because I think he has a talent for presenting these grimy elements in fascinating ways. So the protagonist in this film is, I would say, mentally tough in some aspects, but she decides to endure the bullying until she graduates high school. Now, at one point early on, she's locked inside of a locker. She just pees her pants while she's in there because she can't get out, and the bullies are standing right outside. And then when she's walking home from school, she just throws her soiled panties into a nearby garbage can. So this is, you could tell that she has like an intense streak in her personality, which is appropriate given the later events in the film, but she also engages in acts of self-mutilation in her bedroom at night, which indicates some psychological problems. So the first hour of Hana-Dama is almost like a darkly toned teen bullying drama with some uncomfortable moments and nudity. But there's also a nice friendship dynamic that develops between the 3 bullied student protagonists. It does get pretty nasty, though. The antagonists, which consists of students and teachers, are just repugnant scumbags who will make the viewer's blood boil at times. There are a few scenes that are a bit difficult to sit through, but I think they're necessary. Now, the horror elements ramp up even more during the final half hour. They're pretty bizarre, bloody, and blackly humorous. There are times where you'll just be shaking your head in disbelief at some of the stuff that goes on in this film. I'm really glad that Sato continues to make interesting and unusual films, even during the latter part of his career. He actually made a sequel to this movie with a finale that's even more insane than this one. So I'll review that one when we reach 2016 in this playlist. So fans of unorthodox, sleazy films will want to check this one out. It's definitely different from the norm, people. And given how everyone under the sun associates Japanese horror with ghost girl films, this is the kind of film that most people should probably watch, if only to get a better perspective on the production trends of the industry. However, I'm going to warn you, this is not a film for everyone. In an era where everyone is offended by everything, Sato's films will likely repulse some people out there. So that's just fine with me. So Hana-Dama, which comes recommended, is available on Region 1 DVD and Blu-ray. Alright, our next film tonight is a bit lighter. It's part 1 of a 2-part film, and that is Parasyte, Part 1. Again, a Japanese horror film, and this has a sci-fi bent to it. Worm-like creatures appear on Earth, take over human brains, and kill other humans for food in this creative film that plays out very similarly to the related anime series. Now, the protagonist is a teenage boy who has been infested with a worm, Parasyte, that has settled into his right arm, resulting in an entity that is mentally separate yet physically connected. So together, they grow and coexist together, but the other aliens are making meals of human beings. So our protagonist, human, thinks that he has to put a stop to all of this, but his alien parasite is not so understanding. So this movie has a pretty fun cast. Shota Somatani from Woodjob, Himitsu, Bakuman, etc. Ai Hashimoto from the Little Forest films, The Inerasable, etc. Eri Fukatsu from Villain, Survival Family, etc. And Kazuki Kitamura from Killers, Azumi, etc. play the core characters, and they're all very good in their roles. Now, this horror film is driven by, believe it or not, its thought-provoking interactions between the parasites and the humans. I recently watched the Venom movie, the one with Tom Hardy, and that film does have certain similarities with the Parasyte films, because you have a protagonist human who has been invaded by a parasite who talks with its host, and the two organisms have a conflict of morality. I have not read the manga or comic books that these films were based on, but it would be interesting if someone online did a comparison review of the two. But in any case, I thought that, the Venom film was watchable, but pretty badly written. On the other hand, these Japanese Parasyte films have far better script writing and character development in them, with multidimensionality that is most effectively showcased in Eri Fukatsu's character. Now, in terms of horror content, this taps into the feelings of anxiety that are typically associated with alien invasion films, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. There's a sense of tension and danger throughout. The evil parasites can get pretty creepy, especially the ones who completely lose their minds, and that happens multiple times here. There are some fun death scenes in this for sure, and even some bloody moments to enjoy. The monster effects are actually CGI, but they actually work well here. There are plenty of Asian movies out there that have low-grade CGI that hurts the viewing experience, but Parasyte does a great job of balancing the nutty effects with the dark tones. They actually balance out quite well. It's actually refreshingly unorthodox because of how it successfully achieves that combination here. And after rewatching this again fairly recently, I appreciated the fact that this is a well-made film that puts effort into creating a compelling story. Now, I think it benefits from being seen as a standalone project that is separate from the anime, or the manga. Now, I have seen the anime, which is excellent and even better than the live-action films, but it has been a few years since I've watched the anime, so rewatching the live-action films recently, years later, actually improved my opinions of them, because I was able to more easily separate them from the anime, as a separate project. So if you were to watch the anime and then these live-action films immediately after watching the anime, they won't come off as well as if you give it a little time between them. Now, I am reviewing the second Parasyte live-action film when we cover 2015 in this playlist. So you need to watch both live action films back to back because it's like one big movie cut in half. But I really enjoyed these. I did. The availability of these is that they are available on Region 1 DVD and Blu-ray, just like Hana-Dama. Alright, our next film this evening is an underrated and underappreciated Takashi Miike film, and there are a lot of those. Now, I already reviewed this in my Takashi Miike filmography review playlist. Check out that playlist if you have not already. But I'll repeat my thoughts here for your convenience. And this film is Over Your Dead Body, Japanese horror film. So while rehearsing a stage play based on the story of Yotsuya Kaiden, a couple's romantic obsessions create a blurred line between reality and fantasy. A beautiful actress plays the protagonist in a new play based on the legendary ghost story Yotsuya Kaiden, of course. She pulls some strings to get her lover cast in the play, although he's a relatively unknown actor. And with the cast in place, rehearsals for the play about an abusive relationship and a grudge begin. But offstage, some begin to develop their own obsessions. Trapped between the play and reality, they are horrified to find that a real grudge can cross the blurred line between reality and fantasy. Will love flourish, or has it already turned hideously dark? So first of all, this film looks gorgeous, with some excellent set designs to gawk at. You know, my favorite set involves a black stage with glowing lanterns, which looks really cool. There's a very interesting use of visuals in this film, because it shifts between the period sets that are used for the stage play and the modern environments, okay? Because obviously the stage play is set in a modern building, so you get kind of a juxtaposition of both. You know, so there would be times where you see the stage play occurring, you know, a rehearsal of the stage play, and then the camera will pan over to the crew in the modern building environment, right there in the same shot. So I found that parallel, that comparison, to be pretty fascinating on a visual level, and it supports the themes and the structure of the film overall because there are parallels between Yotsuya Kaiden, the legend, and the stage play, and the character relationships when these people are not rehearsing the stage play in the film. So those parallels are not really spelled out for the viewer through dialogue or monologue, so you do have to pay attention because much of the content is communicated in visual ways. There's definitely some ambiguity here that is subject to interpretation as well, which I liked. So if you're unfamiliar with the story of Yotsuya Kaiden, this movie actually gives you a fairly comprehensive reenactment of that story, which is nice. It also creates a modern reinvention of the story with the visual parallels that I mentioned earlier. This is very well acted. You got Ko Shibazaki and Ebizo Ichikawa. You'll notice Shibazaki from Battle Royale. She played the crazy girl in that one. She also played the lead protagonist in Miike's film One Missed Call. Ichikawa was the lead actor in Miike's remake of Harakiri and has shown himself to be a proficient actor, so the performances are solid here. Now, Over Your Dead Body is deliberately paced, which creates a hypnotic, surreal tone that helps to create some creepy moments. There are also a few bloody, macabre images mixed in as well, which is, you know, something we kind of expect from Miike. The scare tactics are well executed and quietly intense, with virtually no cheap jump scares here. I definitely approve of the horror content in this. Now, I've seen this movie at least 3 times now, and I think it's a strong outing for Miike. This is far more interesting, in my opinion, than something like Gozu, which tried to be psychological and weird, but was too uneventful and obnoxious for its own good. If I had to choose between rewatching Gozu or Over Your Dead Body, I would choose Over Your Dead Body most of the time. Now, this film is available on Region 1 DVD and Blu-ray, again, as well as streaming in the United States. So the availability of these films that we're covering tonight is pretty good so far. Now, our next film tonight comes to us from our good friend, Shinya Tsukamoto, who directs and stars in it. I've covered a bunch of his horror films already in this playlist, but it's been a while since he's directed a horror film that I could include in this, and I will be including this one right now. And that is Fires on the Plain from 2014. This is a Japanese war horror film. So based on a novel which was originally made into the 1959 film by Kon Ichikawa, Tsukamoto brings us this version of hell. It takes place towards the end of World War II. After invading an island in the Philippines, Japanese servicemen meet fierce counteroffensives from the locals and the Allied forces. It's just a matter of time before the few survivors are wiped out. Tamara, played by Tsukamoto, is abandoned by both his platoon and the mobile hospital nearby. Drifting through the jungle, past the dead and dying, and weakened by hunger, illness, and fatigue, he looks ready to abandon his own humanity. So unlike most other films that we will be covering this evening, Fires on the Plain does not have a whole lot of story or character depth to it. But there is some social commentary here on the current events within Japan. Specifically the possible changing of their constitution to rearm and rebuild their military. But outside of that social commentary, this film is basically a stripped down, haunting portrayal of the horrors of war that is visually arresting. It's basically a walk through hell on earth, basically. The constant state of hunger of these characters is portrayed very convincingly, because these soldiers are in really, really bad shape. Tsukamoto wanted to remind the Japanese people of the horrors of war, and I think he succeeded here. This is kind of a very grungy, primal film that will wear down the viewer throughout its runtime, but it's also a bit dreamy in spots, due to the deteriorated mental condition of these characters, because they start to see stuff and almost hallucinate a little bit. And the music supplements this quite well. There's a scorching hot forest environment, which is a great setting here, and it offers some beautiful environments that are juxtaposed with the horrific violence. Tons of nasty corpse shots in this are showcased, as well as some graphic gore and killings. That's not necessarily why I consider this a horror film, because, plenty of war films, dramas and action movies have graphic violence in them. But Tsukamoto contributes a particular style here that lends itself to being an experience of hell on earth that is realistic but exaggerated at the same time. It's just, the way he presents this, it just feels like a horror film. This is so different from the 1959 film of the same name that it's not even comparable, even though it's based on the same novel. So Tsukamoto, in the lead role, gives a very good performance. The 87-minute runtime is perfect. One possible criticism is that this feels very small for a war movie, okay? The use of vehicles and extras is extremely limited. You're dealing with a limited group of people in the middle of a forest, okay? But those budget limitations are used to create a very different viewing experience that you're not gonna get this from most war films, okay? Which makes this very distinct. Most war films try to be grand and epic. This one tries to be very small and personal. So Fires on the Plain is impressive, and yet again, we have a film that is distinguishable and memorable. And this film is available on Region 2 DVD and Blu-ray from Third Window Films. That's a UK release. Alright, our next film is the only non-Japanese title of the evening. I do have a separate review of this one on my channel in a separate video, but again, I could summarize my thoughts here as well. And that is Mad, Sad, Bad. This is a Korean genre-bending anthology. This is an anthology of 3 short films with a total runtime of approximately 2 hours. This is the kind of film that transcends genre classification. I would argue that every segment has a horrific component to it, but it's portrayed through concepts and environments, not visceral scares. So in that sense, it's similar in some ways to something like Snow Woman from 2016, which I also reviewed on my channel. This is a very different creative film that explores its themes in unconventional ways. So the first short story is called Ghost. A teenage boy who is hooked on an internet video game befriends a girl online and comes to her aid when she desperately asks for his help. So our protagonist is a normal high schooler who does not seem to have any friends outside of the internet. He listens to a lot of K-pop music and fantasizes about girls. He also has no aspirations for his future. Now, this segment really focuses on character development and realism, which I appreciate. The dialogue is well written, especially the protagonist's discussions with adults who want him to take his head out of his rear end and make an effort in life. Now, the ending is sufficiently dramatic, violent, and intense. Its portrayal of the nonchalant attitudes of youth is certainly impactful. Of all of the stories in this anthology, Ghost is the one that will probably demand the most patience from the viewer. It's deliberately paced, it relies quite a bit on its social commentary, and it's certainly interesting to watch, but I want you to understand that this is probably the least crowd-pleasing story of the bunch. So most of the actors may not be recognizable to Western viewers, but their performances are solid. Do-Won Kwak, the lead actor from The Wailing, makes a special brief appearance in this, so it's nice to see him here. And you may be surprised to know that this short film was directed by Sung-Won Ryu, the man who gave us The City of Violence and The Berlin File, among many others, so this is a good short film. The second short film is called Saw You. In response to a zombie epidemic, advancements in science and medicine allow humans and cured zombies to live together. Now, medicine taken by the zombies rids them of their disturbing memories, but their mental capacity as a result is typically low, which limits them to taking jobs with unskilled tasks. Now, our main protagonist is a young human guy, regular guy, who works as a manager at a factory where cured zombies work. So it's a pretty interesting premise here. This guy looks down and mistreats these cured zombie workers. But a zombie girl continues to follow him around the factory and attempts to befriend him. Very odd premise, right? So most of these cured zombies kind of act like mentally handicapped people. So the fact that our protagonist treats them like dirt actually makes him look pretty bad. It makes him look like a jerk. This is especially true when he's being mean to this zombie girl, who's probably the cutest zombie of all time. I mean, she's perfectly cast. The lead actress is a girl by the name of Gyuri Nam, who is great in this. Her facial expressions are fantastic, because she portrays herself as emotionally fragile. And as a viewer, you kind of feel sorry for her. It's not that often where you feel like giving a zombie a big hug, but this is definitely the case here. So the premise gives this film an opportunity to be creative, and it certainly is. There are definitely some sequences that I've never seen in a zombie film before, especially at the factory. There are also a few funny bits early on that showcase the kind of uses these cured zombies have, and I like that. There's more than enough time that is spent developing our leads, meaning that there is a bit of a romantic and emotionally resonant experience that develops in this. It really sticks its ending, too. So, the Asian film industries continue to make legitimately good zombie films, and that was not always the case if you've seen some of the prior parts of this playlist. But if I were to make like a top 10 Asian zombie movies list, this short film might make that list. I mean, it's very good. The third short story is called Picnic. And this one is also very interesting. Soo Min is an 8-year-old girl who lives with her mother and her 6-year-old autistic brother Dong Min. They live in a small village by the sea. Soo Min always has to take care of Dong Min while her mother works, and the responsibilities of helping to raise her brother severely limit her ability to have fun and hang out with friends. Now, her only pleasure in life is to read comic books under her blanket. So the little actress in this one is from Train to Busan. She's the lead actress here. So her name is Soo-An Kim. She was very good in Train to Busan, of course, but she's awesome in this short film. She carries this flick on her little shoulders and does a great job of giving a very natural, convincing performance. This is the best performance I've seen from her in her career so far, from what I've seen. And yet again, just like the other short films here, and most of the films I'm covering tonight, this story focuses on character development first and foremost. In fact, I would say that this is probably the most hard-hitting of all of the segments in this anthology. And judging by the quality of the previous stories, that's saying something. So the difficulties of this little girl's situation are excellently developed, and the finale is a fantastic blend of magical, disturbing, and emotional moments. The craftsmanship and subtlety to the ending in particular are really impressive. So if you like movies about children that have like a horror slant to them at times, this is a must-see. Does a great job of capturing the interaction between kids. Fascinating stuff. I definitely recommend it. So this anthology, Mad, Sad, Bad, is really interesting stuff. Now, the availability of this, it used to be on Drama Fever, which is where I watched it, but it's hard to find now. Hopefully it gets pops up again somewhere at some point. But keep it on your radar. All right, so our final 3 films tonight, we're moving back to Japan here. All right, we're moving back to Japan. And this next one is pretty impressive stuff. It is Zero, Fatal Frame. Japanese horror film. Again, we're in 2014, people. Using references to the character Ophelia from William Shakespeare's Hamlet. This film revolves around a Catholic girls' school in Japan where strange events occur after a girl inexplicably becomes an antisocial shut-in. So Aya, the most popular student in the school, suddenly shuts herself in her room. And afterward, her fellow students begin to disappear and turn up dead in the nearby stream. Now, rumor has it that if you kiss Aya's picture at night, you are cursed and spirited away. And Aya's friend Michi decides to investigate this. So one important thing to understand before watching Fatal Frame is that it practically has nothing to do with the video games of the same name. Or so I've heard. I've never played the games myself, but some fans of the games were disappointed with this film because it's entirely different. So be sure to go in this movie with the correct expectations. Now, the qualities that stick out to me when thinking about this Fatal Frame film is that it is of a very high quality and very classy. This is like upper tier supernatural artistry we're talking about here. It has a very classy, Gothic European vibe to it. And part of the reason for this is that it takes place in a Catholic school, which is a religion that is far more popular in Europe than it is in Japan. So we get a lot of imagery and settings that are not traditionally Japanese. And then on top of that, the music sounds like something that you'd hear from a Dario Argento film from the 1970s. The main theme here has shades of Goblin's main track for Suspiria. There's some catchy, nimble piano hooks, as well as some intense organ tracks here. Very cool stuff, and it creates like a thick atmosphere and a dreamy, hypnotic experience. The fact that it's beautifully shot also helps immensely. Now, the mystery component in this film is more interesting and nuanced than a typical ghost flick. It will make the viewer think a bit to put all the pieces together. The plot twists are a little bit confusing when they're initially presented, but they do make sense when all is said and done. It might take 2 viewings for everything to sink in for you. I found it pretty engaging. Now, Mark Schilling from the Japan Times actually summarized the scare tactics nicely when he said that, quote, "The director builds her fright effects more from whispered rumors, girlish crushes, and the nebulous border between dreams and reality, the living and the dead," unquote. I thought that was a nice little summary of the scares in this. There are some really cool and memorable horror sequences in this film. I like the cursed picture and the way it looks, because it looks like a person inside of the frame, the picture frame. The ghost scenes are very neat, especially the ones that take place in the middle of the day. My favorite scene in the whole film is the one involving faintings, which is just awesome. Like, the music and everything is just perfect in that scene. There are almost no jump scares in this, and the few that are used are pretty creative and effective. There are some disorienting visions that are very good as well. All of the scares have an eerie beauty to them, which I really liked. There are no Onryo ghosts in this either, so you don't have to worry about that cliche. Now, at times, Fatal Frame reminded me a little bit of Kiyoshi Kurosawa's films, at least in terms of some of the imagery, the sound design, like the expert use of silence in this. And it also reminded me a bit of Whispering Corridors as well, with the schoolgirl relations being of vital importance to this. So this has some pretty high quality stuff that makes you think of other high quality films. The director is Mari Asato, who previously gave us Gomenasai and Bilocation, So this is another talented director to keep our eyes on. I do think that Zero Fatal Frame is the best in this filmography for this director. So yeah, I definitely highly recommend this film. It is available on all-region Malaysian DVD with subtitles, but it's also on YouTube with subtitles. Alright, our last two films tonight are, again, pretty memorable, people. We have arrived at our second Takashi Miike film of the evening, and this one is completely different from Over Your Dead Body. And that is As the Gods Will, a Japanese horror comedy, I guess you could call it. Now, the lead character in this movie is a teenager by the name of Shun Takahata, who begins the film by complaining about his incredibly boring life. Well, that soon changes when his teacher's head explodes in the middle of class. It is soon revealed that Japan has been visited by godlike beings that have targeted high schools for experimentation. Consequently, Shun and his classmates must outwit these sadistic Japanese deities in a series of deadly games. Now, I've said this before this evening, and I'm going to say it again. Right from the opening scene, the viewer is going to realize that this movie is something very different. This is one of the more creative and entertaining opening sequences in recent memory. And to make it even better, it involves an evil Daruma doll, an item that is usually seen as a symbol of perseverance and good luck in Japanese culture. So if you're not entertained by this opening sequence, I don't know what to tell you, because it completely won me over. It's such an extremely demented and nutty premise, which allows Miike to contribute a wide variety of supernatural death games that utilize culturally specific objects as physical bodies of gods. I mean, this gives the film a distinctive Japanese feel. If Hollywood ever decided to remake this, they would need to change most of these evil objects because Americans would have no idea what to make of them. So in other words, only Japan could have possibly produced this particular film. Another thing I liked is that there are some very clever little moments to enjoy in this. For example, the musical game with revolving wooden kokeshi dolls is solved in a pretty fantastic fashion. And this element is important because just when some of the sequences feel like they're beginning to drag out, for example, the polar bear scene, they resolve themselves in some kind of unpredictable, almost clever manner that brings you right back into the film. The script is so energetic and it changes things up so frequently that it's impossible to get bored while watching this film. Lots of CGI effects are used, but yet again tonight, it works for this particular film because of the fantastical nature of the attacks, as well as the boatload of black humor that's present. This is actually a very funny movie. I laugh out loud every time I watch it, but it's also kind of demented in like a charming way. Fast-paced and a lot of fun, all right? So bottom line, if you want something that's different and creative within the horror genre, watch this flick. It sounds like it might be similar to some other death game flicks we've covered in this playlist, like, X Game, Death Bell, or even the next film that we're covering tonight. But this is so different and fantastical that any similarities are merely superficial. I really enjoy As the Gods Will, and I enjoy it every time I rewatch it, and I rewatch it a lot. So yeah, I know some people complain about the ending to this. It's almost like a cliffhanger ending, but I think it just fits in well with the blackly humorous structure of everything that comes before it. So I like this one. This one is available on Region 1 DVD and Blu-ray. There's a Funimation release of it. Alright, here we go. We've reached my personal favorite Asian horror film of 2014. Yeah, this one's awesome. And it's called Puzzle, Japanese horror flick. So a high school student, Azusa, jumps off of a rooftop of a school building, but she survives. 1 month later, the school is taken over by a group of people wearing bizarre masks. A pregnant teacher is imprisoned, while the head director of the school and male students disappear. Now, teachers and students are terrorized by a series of attacks, which force them to find puzzle pieces in order to save their fellow students from impending death. Now, Azusa then finds pieces of a puzzle in an envelope given to her by a classmate. This piece of the puzzle holds a key to saving lives. So this film was directed by Eizuki Naito, who is compiling a very interesting filmography, I must say. I reviewed his horror comedy film, The Crone, in my 2013 video. I also did a separate review of his most recent horror film, Liverleaf, on my channel as well, which was incredibly interesting. Naito creates movies that are very distinct and memorable, which is something I really appreciate, as you can probably tell by looking at the films we're covering tonight. So it's no surprise that Puzzle is a little bit different from what you might expect. It's structured like a mystery, shifting back and forth in time while the violent attacks are peppered throughout. There's a lot of scenes that take place outside of the school in different times to produce a backstory about the current situation and conflict. It flows very swiftly and nicely, keeping the viewer engaged without getting too confusing. This is pretty easy to follow. It's nicely structured and scripted. The 85-minute runtime is perfect because there's no dead weight or filler to sit through. That's one of the main reasons why this is my favorite Asian horror film of 2014. It's entertaining for every single minute of its runtime. Now, in terms of horror, it's bloody and concentrated doses, and the types of violence can get pretty wince-worthy here. Some scenes are a bit shocking. The acts of violence are demented, which is supplemented by an oddly happy and oddball score. The music in this film is very light and happy music, which is really bizarre stuff. And then you have the sunflower masks of the murderers. They wear masks that look like sunflowers, which is pretty creepy as well. And because of this combination of qualities, the way in which the violence is presented in this film is pretty interesting. Puzzle is visually engaging and creative as well. There's a very brief 5-second shot near the end that actually reminded me of Tetsuo the Iron Man of all films. I'm not joking. The final credits are presented with one of the characters dancing while soaked in blood. Again, not something you see that often. The actress Kaho is very good in the lead role. I've grown to be a fan of hers after watching stuff like All Esper Dio, Our Little Sister, Tokyo Vampire Hotel, and Puzzle, of course. Now this movie, it's a must-watch for anyone who wants to keep up with contemporary Asian horror. It's just so entertaining. Now, unfortunately, the availability of this one, unlike a lot of the other films we covered tonight, is kind of difficult. It's kind of like Mad, Sad, Bad. But at least Puzzle is available on Japanese DVD without subtitles, which could be doable. It's fast-paced and very visually presented, so you might be able to follow this without subtitles. Alright, so that concludes part 5 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2014. Now, there are a lot of pretty fascinating and interesting movies to check out from this year. As usual, Japan carries the load because of their production levels, but we had a handful of contributions from other countries as well, if you check out the prior parts of this video. Now, we continue to see a nice variety in the types of films here. I mean, heck, in this video alone, we covered a grimy revenge movie, an alien invasion film, a modern interpretation of a popular Japanese legend, a film that showcases the horrors of war, a diverse anthology film, a classy gothic supernatural film, a film about sadistic Japanese deities, and a fast-paced game of death flick. And again, I must point out that most of these movies are not the kinds of films that are typically associated with Asian horror in popular circles on the internet, but they do exist, and they're totally worth checking out. So be sure to join me next time, because I'm going to crack into Asian horror films from 2015. I'm just about ready to start that year at this point, so I might be able to knock out part 1 sometime in October. That's kind of my goal. So, as always, I'll see you next time.